kickoff is the debut showing of what has become known as our inspirational film for the year. And I think when you see this year's film, you're going to understand why we use that phrase, the inspirational film. It documents the courage of a very special American Cancer Society volunteer. Let's let the film speak for itself.
Hi, this is Fran Tarkington. When I was scrambling quarterback in the National Football League, the announcers up in the booth sometimes said I looked like I was scrambling for my life. Well, I guess it looked that way to them and to the fans. It wasn't my life I was scrambling for. I wanted to make things happen in the game, open it up, create opportunities for my team. There are people, though, who have had to scramble for their lives. These are men and women who've had cancer, who've been faced with the challenge of making things happen in their everyday lives despite having had the disease. We're going to see some people in this film who had the courage to keep going, to keep scrambling. And in every case, it took the sort of personal fortitude and positive attitude that all winners are made of. The first person to be treated successfully with interferon, a drug which represents a big investment by the society and holds out great promise for the future.
When I was sick, my doctors were very concerned that I resume my running. It's a way of validating yourself, a way of showing yourself that you can make it. And it doesn't matter if you run 100 miles, even if you run a few feet. But it makes a lot of difference because cancer patients tend to get depressed, they get down. And I remember that first time that my buddies came up the hill and they said, "Come on, Hirshel, you can do it." And I kind of stumbled out of my house. But once I got going, I had a goal in front of me and it got my energies going. And I began to think of what was possible to do.
People told me I always treated Hirshel as if he were well. Even though there were times he was very angry at me, I had to decide what was right for me, and I did not let anyone in the family or friends intrude upon that sense of what I thought was right, because no one knew my husband and my relationship better than the two of us. So I always treated him as if he were totally well.
I think a lot of us are too afraid to approach cancer patients. We don't know what to say. But I have to tell everybody out there, it doesn't matter what you say, however awkward it is. The person I understood when I was a patient, it didn't matter if people were saying things that weren't quite on the beam. The important thing that is you show the person you care about them. You could just sit there and say nothing and hold their hand. And that's a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah, sometimes I might fall into a little depression and then I get mad at myself for doing it. And then I try to say, to hell with it, I gotta go. Don't dwell on it and think of something else.
Well, are we both going to have a little contract here to take care of each other and look after each other?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that any human being can help another human being when they go through that kind of a valley. I remember when I was a patient in the hospital, they sent an ordinary guy to counsel me and tell me what he had been through. And that was wonderfully encouraging because I got to see somebody who had been through it, and only the ones who have been through it really understand what it's like. A lot of my friends and my congregants ask me, "Rabbi, weren't you angry when you found out you had the disease?" I remember when Judy and I were sitting in the office of our hematologist and he told me I had hairy cell leukemia. I really wasn't asking the question, why me? I was asking, I was almost saying to myself as a rabbi, why not me? Visiting patients for so many years, I realized that anybody can get sick, the rich and the poor, the strong and the weak. We are all vulnerable. The question is, what are you going to do about this challenge that's been given to you? And I really feel that I've grown. I wouldn't say that I'm lucky because I suffered, but certainly this challenge has allowed me to become a much better human being.
Rabbi Jaffe has become a national celebrity through his courage and his determination. His successful treatment with interferon has been documented. He works for the American Cancer Society as an I Can Cope volunteer and a celebrity against cancer. His is a message of hope where cancer is concerned, His book, Why Me, Why Anyone, has received national special recognition from the Leukemia Society of America. Rabbi Jaffe is living testimony to the life-affirming path that we can all follow in the face of any immense adversity. We're privileged to count him among the ranks of American Cancer Society volunteers like you. Please join with me in welcoming Rabbi Jaffe.
I'm so glad to be here in Dallas. Back in the late 1960s, this was our first congregation. And believe it or not, although many years passed until I was stricken, my friends in Dallas never forgot me. They came to my side. It's true. I was the running rabbi when I entered the New York City Marathon in 1978. My friends made me a T-shirt. They said, Hirshel, everybody's got to have a special logo. It gets the crowd with you. They kind of cheer you on when they see who you are. And so they made me this T-shirt, the Running Rabbi. That's become my logo. Little did I realize that someday my wife and daughters who were cheering me on that day in the New York City Marathon would cheer me on in a different kind of a race. I'm not a famous rabbi. I'm not a celebrity. My daughter cautioned me when the book came out never to say I was autographing my book. She said, Dad, only celebrities autograph their books. Just say you're signing your name. But at times in my life, I have been an activist because of my feeling about humanity, the teachings of my faith. And so I found myself on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1980, visiting our American hostages who spent those terrible 444 days of incarceration in Tehran. I went with the delegation of Americans. It was a very dark time, and we came to give them the love and the affection of the American people. Being Valentine's Day, we brought them candy and flowers and told them that they were not forgotten. Later, when I returned to Newburgh, we adopted the mother of one of the hostages. His name was Bill Dougherty, a straight up-and-down American. They had him in solitary confinement for 400 days. And beat him up pretty good sometimes, but Bill Dougherty never complained. He said, Rabbi, there were people who had it worse than me in Vietnam. But Bill's mother gave me a silver bracelet to wear for him. It said, William J. Dougherty, Tehran, November 4th, 1979. What a wonderful day. In 1981, Judy and I were privileged to be in the White House. I guess it was the proudest day of our lives, when President Reagan greeted the hostages, and I said, Bill, I'd like to return the silver bracelet to you if you come to Newburgh for the yellow ribbon ceremony. And he said to me, and it was a crowd stopper, he said, Rabbi Jaffe, if you don't mind, I'd like to take that silver bracelet from you now. Later, Bill wrote to me that the moment the bracelet was transferred, the pain began to be assuaged. Never did I think that just a few short years later, I would be a hostage to my own disease, trying to save my own life. Because I felt indestructible. I was the running rabbi, a servant of God. And then in the spring of 1982, minding my own business, running along the banks of the Hudson River in Newburgh, New York, I began to inexplicably slow down. I thought, well, maybe I'm getting older, maybe the heat is getting to me, maybe I'm lackluster. And I tried to push the hills, but no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't make the hills the same way. And just a few days later, my disease accelerated so fast, found myself in the laboratory of a local hospital where the doctors were checking my blood counts. And I had my 10-year-old daughter, Nina, with me. And with that childlike perception, she looked up at the doctors and the nurses and the lab technicians when they were taking my blood, and it was obvious that the counts were terrible. All my blood counts were plummeting. And she looked up and said, very simply, is my daddy going to die? The next day in the hematologist's office, I heard the diagnosis, Rabbi Jaffe, you have a rare form of leukemia, hairy cell leukemia. We don't know much about it. And I have to tell you, just like I said when the film was made, as a rabbi, even more than the title of my book, which happens to be Why Me, Why Anyone, but what I really asked at the beginning was, why not me? None of us are immune. All of us are vulnerable. It was probably the fighting spirit within me, where I said to the doctor, how long do people live with this disease? And he said, we don't know, Rabbi. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 5 years. I said, okay, I'll take the upper limit. And I remember saying with, I guess, my running spirit, my fighting spirit, well, he said, well, take your spleen out, Rabbi. That's the first thing we do for patients like you. Maybe you'll bounce back into remission. And I said, when will I be running again? I did run again for a while and went into a remission, and then about 18 months later, my blood counts plummeted again, and everything broke loose. I had a tremendous ordeal, and I wouldn't burden you with that, just to say it involved 3 operations, chemotherapy. Many times it was thought that I wouldn't make it. I remember leaving my doctor's office, and he later confessed to me that when I left that day, he never thought he would see me again. Then came the vulnerability of my immune system. You know about that. Fevers of 105 degrees that gave me the shaking chills. I became a rather emaciated form. And from the same airport where the hostages had landed when I greeted them, I, now hostage to my own disease, Stewart Airport in Newburgh, by a wonderful miracle, a little angel of mercy jet plane that was provided for me by the corporate angel network that takes cancer patients for medical treatment. And just when I needed it, it took me and Judy to the University of Chicago Hospital, because only a short while before, interferon, that wonderful immunological drug, was discovered to help people with my disease. And I have to say right now that you made the medicine possible through your fundraising, through your convictions, through the courage of a Dick Rauscher. Yes, American Cancer Society's backing of interferon was a corporate decision, but it was a human decision on Dick's part. And so I was flown to the University of Chicago Hospital in that little jet plane. My eyes were rolling in my head. They thought I might die on the flight. And that night, my doctor got emergency permission from the FDA, compassionate usage. They said, we've done everything else for Rabbi Hirshel Jaffe. Give us this one more chance. And doesn't that show you that there can always be hope? And that's what, of course, I tell others, and that's why I am here. How did we make the medicine work? Because actually, when I thank my doctors for getting the interferon, and when it began to work its wonderful effects on me, they said, Rabbi Jaffe, don't thank us. You made the medicine work, and all of you understand perhaps how important it is to have a fighting spirit, to have the support, as I did, of my running buddies who kept cheering me on, my friends, the people in my congregation, and all people of every faith. For example, a priest friend of mine, a Roman Catholic priest, who cared about me enough to go to the Holy Wall in Jerusalem, and in that wall he put a little note with a prayer. That's what our people have done over the centuries in time of trouble. At the holiest place for the Jewish people, the temple in Jerusalem, they insert a prayer and a request. And my friend, Father Tom Fenlon, just wrote a prayer to the Almighty saying, God, help my friend, Rabbi Hirshel Jaffe. What everybody was saying to me was, Hirshel, don't quit, the magic words. Keep up your spirits. And one day, my wife, Judy, came into my room when everything was going wrong, with the pain and all the cloudiness and the fevers and the emaciation. And she smiled, and with her faith, and you know, you saw Judy in the film and you realize what a tough lady she is. My book is dedicated to her. Well, when we took those marriage vows, the Song of Songs says, "Set me as a seal upon your heart, for love is stronger than death." Well, I don't think that Judy bargained for that much adversity, but look what she did to help me. And then my daughter Nina, people wonder how children react to a life-threatening illness assaulting their parent. Well, Nina gave me a boost because she would ask me, "Daddy, how are you?" And I was maybe a little bit too pathetic, and I would say, "Daddy's feeling a little better. Daddy's feeling a little better." And one day Nina said to me, "Daddy, couldn't you take all the little betters and make it a lot better?" I wrote this book as therapy. My friends came and said to me, "Hirshel, people would want to know how a rabbi, a man of God, a servant of humanity, how he reacts when his life is threatened. Do the prayers work?" So the book really was good therapy to me. I never thought it would be published. I thought it might be my legacy. And in the book, I put some more secrets, some of which you know and which perhaps you will utilize in your own struggles in life. The sense of humor that is so important. One day, it happened to be Halloween. About 6 o'clock in the morning, Judy came into my room, and she had this grotesque Frankenstein mask. And she said, "Hirshel, put this mask on. It'll really send a message to the doctors." And the doctors came in my room. I had this hideous Frankenstein mask on, and I said in a very weak voice, Doctors, the medicine you have given me, something hideous has happened and made me grotesque in the middle." And then another time when Judy wasn't there and she was back in New York taking care of the kids, she Federal Expressed me my Adidas running suit, and she said, "Hirshel, I'm coming to the hospital to get you because you're getting better, but I want you to know that you have to act like a human being and not a hospital patient." And so I put on my Adidas running suit and I was walking the halls, and I guess with my mustache and my glasses and my erudite look, people started calling me doctor. And speaking of my doctors, actually my chief doctor, Dr. Harvey Golem, happens to be Jewish, but the miracle is that the year I was saved in 1985, in that cold winter in Chicago, Hanukkah and Christmas came together at exactly the same time. As a matter of fact, a group of carolers came into my room, including a Santa Claus, and they began to sing Hebrew Hanukkah songs. And I said, "Am I in heaven?" And well, the next day, a gentleman comes in and he says, "Rabbi Jaffe, my name is Sam Goldberg." I said, "Oh, how do you do, Mr. Goldberg?" He said, "I'm Santa Claus." It means that on Christmas Day, the Jewish people were volunteering for their Christian friends. And that, of course, is an example of the humanity that can bring us all together. But my doctor likes to say now that he shows me off as one of the sickest patients who was saved with interferon. My Jewish doctor turns to all the residents every time I go for my visits, and he says, "Remember the Christmas that we resurrected the rabbi?" I said, "Doctor, that's an inappropriate expression to use about..." But there in the hospital, sure, I was a rabbi, but that doesn't mean I was any different from any one of you. I had the same vulnerability and fallibility, and I went into periods of depression, and I really didn't know how to pray well enough, even though I had led people in the prayers. And there I found my personal God. One night in the hospital, I prayed Psalm 121, which I had prayed for so many others in time of trouble. You know how it goes. I lift up mine eyes to the mountains. From whence cometh my help? My help cometh from God who made heaven and earth. Well, I started to invoke that prayer and nothing was happening. But just a few days before, some friends of mine who were Christian were praying with me, and they were holding my hand and saying, "God, please help our friend Hirshel. He loves his wife Judy and his children Rachel and Nina, and he wants to live to rejoin them as a father. And of course the tears began to come, and so I said, well, I'll try to pray personally. And it wasn't anymore, I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from whence cometh my help. It was something like this. There in the middle of the night, God, I'm trying to get up this mountain, and every time I get near the top, I get knocked down again. Now, God, Lord, I'm not asking you anymore to get me all the way up to the peak of the mountain. But God, could you hold my hand? Be kind to me. Comfort me. And just don't let me fall any further down the mountain into the abyss. You have to learn how to pray personally like that. You have to learn that God cares about you. And then in the end, and I want to tell you this, you must learn how to care about yourself and comfort yourself when nobody is there. And my nurses told me when I visited them, they said, you know, Rabbi Jaffe, when you were in those darkest days, we heard a terrific shouting from your hospital bed in the middle of the night, and we thought, oh God, it's those fevers again. And we came into your room and you said, Rabbi Jaffe, they said, it was like you were in a marathon. You were pounding on the rails of your bed. I said, really? And they said, yes, and you were shouting out like in a marathon. And I said, well, what was I yelling? And they said, well, you were yelling out, come on, Hirshel. What I say to you is that too much do we refer to cancer patients as terminal and as victims. And when I appeared before the Congressional Committee on Health to urge more funds for cancer research, and the congressman was referring to me and others as victims of cancer, I departed from my prepared text and said, may I correct you, Congressman Pepper, not victims, but victors, living with cancer. And the truth is that I am running again. Now, I want to tell you just briefly about somebody who didn't make it, and all of you who are so wonderfully caring about other human beings. How can I say no to anything that is asked of me by the American Cancer Society? You know that not everybody makes it, but what wonderful inspiration you can get from human beings of courage. And I met somebody who inspired me. He was a young man in the University of Chicago Hospital, and my doctors were afraid that I was getting too depressed, and I was curled up in my bed, and they said, Rabbi Jaffe, maybe it would be good therapy for you. Be a rabbi. Go and visit some of the other patients. And I had seen a young man down in physical therapy. He was in a wheelchair, and he was trying to lift himself up on the parallel bars. And the people around him were saying, come on, Jerry, you can do it. And I was lying on a mat kind of weakly, and I looked up and they were saying, that's it, Jerry, you made it. Well, I tell you, friends, if my friend Jerry lifted himself up even an eighth of an inch, it was imperceptible, but of course the cancer had involved his spine, and that was a Herculean effort for Jerry. So that night I went to his room, and he didn't really know who I was, and he said, how you doing there, friend? I saw you down, Hirshel, I saw you down there in PT. And he was really bad off, worse than I. Well, that's all I needed. I started to pour out a whole litany of depressive complaints. I said, I don't know, Jerry, I think the doctors are avoiding me. I don't think I'm ever going to get out of this hospital. And he said, well, now, Hirshel, didn't I hear that you're Jewish? This is what this 28-year-old young man said to me. I said, that's right, I'm Jewish. He said, well, didn't somebody tell me that you're a rabbi? I said, that's right, Jerry, I'm a rabbi. He said, well, Rabbi, Hirshel, I'm a Christian. I don't know much about the Jewish religion, but don't your people through their survival, preach a message of hope? So, Hirshel, why don't you practice what you preach and be more hopeful? That young man embarrassed me. I went back to my room. I banged on the wall. That's when I probably said, why me? Why anyone? Why should a young person have to suffer? But he gave me inspiration, and I think you realize the end of the story. I kept visiting Jerry after I got out of the hospital and went back every month to Chicago. And I would go to see him, and one time I went and I was getting onto the floor and I was saying to the nurses, how's my friend Jerry? And at the same time, they were saying, oh, Rabbi Jaffe, he didn't make it. And I banged on the wall and I cried out, and they took me into the lounge and they said, oh, Rabbi, we shouldn't have told you that quickly about Jerry, but we thought you were a rabbi, you're used to that. But of course, you're not a rabbi. You're human. Now, to this day, in the Hebrew prayers at my temple, when we read the prayer of sanctification and holiness for our departed, I read the name of my friend Jerry because he gave me help and inspiration. Last May, for the American Cancer Society, after the miracle of the interferon, yes, it's true, 95% of my bone marrow was malignant. My blood counts were terrible. I was having transfusions. It was that rare opportunistic infection, a strange TB that almost killed me with those fevers of 105. And along came the interferon, and the risk that the American Cancer Society is willing to take in the venture of helping other human beings. And I know and I see, when I go around and speak to you volunteers, that many people like you are out playing tennis and frittering away their time in life. And if I can sermonize, maybe too involved in material things, but thank goodness you people are taking time out of your lives to do what really, really counts. Let me conclude with this story. There was a young man who was troubled, and he went to his rabbi. And the rabbi was sitting by the fire, and the young man said, Rabbi, I don't know if I can pray. I don't know if I can have faith. There's some terrible illness in my family. People are suffering. Times are bad. And the rabbi didn't say a word. He was sitting by a fire, and the fire was growing dim, and the embers were beginning to scatter. And while the young man was saying that he couldn't reach heaven and find any inspiration, without a word, the rabbi took the poker by the fire, and he began to stoke the dying embers in a little heap. And of course, what do you think happened in that room where the rabbi sat with the depressed and despondent student? When he heaped those coals, those embers, there was a renewed burst of warmth and flame and light. And the student said, oh, I see, Rabbi. I see. What do we see? All of us. In this world, it is very lonely. In this world, there is illness and trial and suffering. And when you are alone, it is so cold. But when one human being holds out a hand to another, when we all join hands, then like those embers bursting into flame, there is in our lives renewed warmth and goodness and kindness. And yes, friends, there is the presence of God. Thank you. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me somewhere beyond the barricade? Is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes.